Thank you.
Well, first of all, good morning.
Good morning.
You're still with us?
Oh, yeah.
I know it's a long morning, lots of excitement too. The other thing I have to just be straightforward, I don't have any cocaine stories. So I'm going to apologize for that. I could make some. Now, personally, I do. I mean, no, I don't. You didn't have that. Actually, I want to start off by just saying this. I love historic sites. I mean, I love them. And the reason I love them, I love the architecture, I love the decorative arts. My background's curatorial and collections, and I love that stuff. And I just said the key word is stuff. But what I really love it, and Lisa, you said it, it's about power place. And what I find with historic properties, historic sites, historic homes, it's where you humanize people. And you could use your own definition of what you mean, but you have the opportunity, perhaps better than else, where to make people people. And to really dissect people. And what does that mean? Or why does that matter? Again, by humanizing, you make them relevant. And there's relevancy, I think, that's sometimes lost with museums. And we all know that. We talk about relevancy, connections, and all that. But for me, and I'm speaking only just for myself, historic properties allow you to do that. I think in a way that's also because of authenticity, and what is authentic, we'll talk about that. And I'll talk a little bit about recreated authenticity, if that even makes sense. So I want to tell you, I actually am involved with an organization called the Historic Ford Estates. We actually own and operate two different estates. One is the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House in Grosse Pointe. That's not this one. As you're looking at it, I just want to make sure you knew that. Because I'm not going to talk about that place because, Frank, if you went to go visit us over in Grosse Pointe, and many of my colleagues here, you would find it very beautiful. It's beautiful. It's a nice tour. It is traditional, it is typical, it is what you would expect. A lot of potential, a lot of opportunity, and we're working on that. However, this estate called Fairlane, this is the home, the 15th and final house of Henry and Clara Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. And this is a place that, I'll be honest with you, even those here from Michigan's been on your radar. And for a whole host of reasons, but it's amazing that this iconic American that you can argue in many ways, did change the world, also was human, had good sides and bad sides. And that this individual, this iconic American's family, their house, and what epitomizes them as a family is sitting here in Dearborn, but again has been under the radar. Now, it has had an interesting story in history. It was constructed really in about 1915-16, they moved in, the family, and this became their dream house, built on the success of the Model T. So it's a kind of a typical captain industry story, although a captain that was self-taught, self-motivated, and created his own fortune. But they dreamed this house, and they built this house. And part of the reason for building this house was to get away from public eye. He became he was the richest man in the world, but also one of the most known people in the world. And you can imagine, just think of our press today, the attention, the people seeking money, seeking jobs, seeking interviews. And so this was kind of an escape, and that's important too. So the Fords lived there until Clara dies. He dies in 47, she dies in 1950. And then what happens to this place? Because again, all historic sites have this history, and it's multiple histories typically, just like your own house. By 50-51, the family there, after Clara's death, gives it to Ford Motor Company. So all of a sudden you have a corporation taking on a historic property. What do they do with it? They turn into their first corporate archives and kind of a corporate retreat center. Now for all of us, and at least it was preserved, at least it was still there. They were not thinking about the importance of legacy, of heritage. They were thinking of assets, and we need space. So they did things such as filling in a swimming pool to make archives. They did, rooms became offices, fluorescent lights everywhere, paint many places. So it changed. That's not unusual. In 56, Henry Ford II started talking with the University of Michigan. And the idea was that Ford Motor Company would donate this property, the historic homes, 210 acres, and about $6.5 million if they would start a Dearborn campus. Now that would benefit, of course, the university, but it also benefited Ford Motor Company. Having highly trained, educated individuals in their backyard, Ford World headquarters being right there, this was kind of a mutual understanding, and it worked out well. So really, for the next 50 years, even longer than the Fords lived there, the university owned it, and they used it. I know my colleagues from Meadowbrook are here, and Cranbrook, and we understand that conflict of preservation and use. But they did use it. They gave tours, and you can come visit it, and you can experience things. But they also used it where the archives in the pool room became a restaurant, and a very active restaurant. They did events, weddings, we're talking about that, driving revenue, doing whatever was needed. But because of that, though, its story, its importance, was never fully, in my opinion, embraced or leveraged. And again, this is a place of people, of stories. And so you have Claire and the gardens and grandchildren, and think about this, a guy that has, under the microscope, and this is where he would go to be human. You can find the story of Henry Ford anywhere and everywhere. And it's a fascinating story in itself, and as I said, very complex. But think about house. This is where you went. This is where you unwound. This is where you probably talked the truth. This is where you talk to your wife, probably, and get advice on life decisions. You see how I said that? My wife saw that on camera. And again, how we use it today. But what I want to do is, this is kind of the campus now. Originally, this was about a 1,400-acre estate. Farmland, chickens, poultry, all that kind of stuff going on. Today, we have about 16 acres. So our footprint has shrunk, which means that what we do there has to be impactful within that. What I'm going to show you here is a video that we put together. So it's slightly dated. I see my staff laughing because they've seen this video so many damn times. But I'm hoping that this gives you a little bit about our vision for the estate and how it is different. Okay, well, there we go. Let's see.
My parents would take my brothers and me here on a weekend. I remember for the first time seeing the big fireplace down in the basement, and one of Henry's more famous quotations, "If you chop your own wood, it'll warm you twice." And that always stuck with me, something that I think is pretty fitting. He was very self-sufficient, and I think that really speaks to a lot of who he was as a person. I'm Henry Ford III, and welcome to Fairlane, the home of my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, Henry and Clara Ford. Like many historical homes, Fairlane has been repurposed many times. I'm very excited to say that this house is being brought back to life just the way it was when Henry and Clara lived here many years ago.
This will be an historic house with no boundaries, no velvet ropes, and we are going to invite you to use the rooms the way Henry and Clara and their family and their friends would have.
Within this whole nation, there's only a handful of historic estates that are tied to an American icon. To have this here in Dearborn, the home of this individual that really changed America and changed the world. That's what makes it very special and unique, and that's why we're so dedicated to its preservation and recreation. At the foundation of everything we're doing, it starts with real solid scholarly research. So we're putting a lot of energies and a lot of resources into better understanding Henry and Clara Ford, and through them, the evolution of this estate.
We have to look at what is behind the layers of paint on the wall, what is underneath carpeting that is on floors, to really discover the home that Henry and Clara designed 100 years ago. And then the process begins to bring that house back.
Imagine she just said that. We want to make sure that we're presenting what Henry and Clara were first recognizing when they moved in. And it was a much different house than what you see here today. What we do know through film and through photographs how these rooms changed. And they changed pretty dramatic, pretty quickly.
After 1950, Ford Motor Company acquired the house from the Ford family. At the end of 1956, Henry Ford II gave the estate to the University of Michigan. The university closed it in 2010 to transfer ownership of the estate to a new 501c3 that we have established. That brings us to today. The official transfer was the summer of 2013, and we hit the ground running at that time.
As one can imagine, a project of this sheer size and the detail of this is just overwhelming at times.
In the exposure window on the ceiling, we have found original decoration. So we'll put up a piece of Mylar and actually trace that design so we get all the little nuances about it, brush strokes and other things. Ultimately, a restoration is an interpretation. It's based on the level of information that you have. Now, fortunately, we do have a lot of information, and that has really helped kind of build the story.
There are photographs, there's film footage of this family, there are written documents, there are invoices, there are letters.
And it's such a deep repository, all the way down to receipts.
They give you a snapshot into a moment in time, into how a room looked, how something was furnished.
We want to recreate and replicate all the furnishings, and it's not just only something off the shelf. And we're trying to really recreate something that does not exist anymore in the highest detail as possible to recreate that aesthetic feel.
There's a lot of components to the project. There's a couple arms on some wooden chandeliers that will eventually go back into the music room. So I had to carve the elements and then go leave it. So there's a lot of components to it. And if you don't do every component correct, then it will stand out like a sore thumb.
We're talking right now about how we want to marry authenticity with experience, with preservation, with access. We're not limited with original objects, and we have so much more freedom to be creative, to be innovative with these spaces. We want things to be able to be touched, to be used. Just to give ourselves the opportunity to do that is something historic houses have not been able to do. Imagine coming into Henry Ford's billiard room and actually shooting around the pool.
The house is fascinating, and the interiors are interesting, and obviously it's done on this grand scale.
I immediately fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the craftsmanship in the house. In my career, I'm able to recognize diamonds in the rough, and I'll say my old age, I was in on that.
We have stopped the leaks in the roof. We know that we have repaired the collapsing foundations and collapsing riverbanks. And so the investment that we're making to restore and bring the rooms back will last. We are putting 10 cents of every dollar we raise into an endowment. So it will grow up and be self-sustaining. Of that goal of what we're raising, the Ford family and Ford Motor Company have given us almost half of that already.
We want to activate this human potential in individuals. We want you to get in the minds of Henry and Clara. We want them to inspire you. We want this estate to inspire you.
Just imagine that young kid who comes through here, they go to his lab and they feel the energy of knowing that's where he experimented and did things.
I would love to see this be a place where real true dialogue and conversations occur amongst visitors.
The stories, the values, the legacy of Henry and Clara is full of messages still as relevant today as they were in Henry and Clara Ford's day. Every single one of us leaves a footprint on this earth. Every one of us can decide what that footprint is.
The story of Henry and Clara is a story that would really appeal to a lot of people in my generation who maybe don't already know it. It's a story of entrepreneurship, it's a story of innovation. This house, seeing how they lived, seeing everything here helps paint that picture.
I'm going to tell you, if you saw that actually synced up, it's even more powerful. I promise you that. So that was just to give you a little sense of the vision, but again, how do you get from A to B? And that's really the challenge and really what my colleagues have been talking about and does such a good job expressing that, this is it's such an opportunity to look at things differently. In many ways, we have to, but in most ways, we just should. It's the right thing to do. But what I'm going to really kind of talk about for the time that I have is not so much what this is going to be, what are you going to do there? What's the experience? Because I'm going to be completely honest with you. We don't know yet. We don't know what the performance is going to be. We're working on that. We've actually visited our colleagues, Montpelier and Mount Vernon and historic properties throughout this country, just to get some inspiration, to go to talks, to see how we might address this differently. And how do you take such an iconic but also contradictory individual as Henry Ford and utilize that for a bigger story, contextualize it. But what I want to talk about is actually setting the stage. We talked about the performances, and that's what a lot today, but setting the stage. It's all about for us is that we have a clean slate. Think about how few a time in our fields that you have an opportunity to go into a property that's not self-established already and say, dream the dream. What would you do in these spaces? How would you interpret it? What would you do? And we made the decision early on to determine our period significance and kind of focus. And I do agree with Frank when you talked about, you have these periods of significance, but it has to be beyond that. It has to be today, and how do you bring those things in? But we chose a period because it's really when Henry in particular was at the forefront of everything he was doing, and all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it allows us to bring those into contextual concepts and dialogues and conversations moving forward. But that's a good span. We also had to say, we made the decision, I should say, that we were going to focus on a specific time period. And that's, for us, decided circa 1919. As all historic properties, it evolved. And I'm now talking specifically about decoration and presentations and aesthetics and furnishings. So we picked that first kind of era. We wanted it where it was about a couple years lived in, but also that it was a couple years lived in, but it was also well documented through photographs, receipts. So we weren't making things up. The facts are kind of there as we talked about the facts. And we still have to have conversations and make some educated decisions. But we also wanted to recreate, because it had changed so much, the estate that Henry and Claire and Edsel Ford dreamed and created. That's important, at least for me, because, again, it changed, but this is their opportunity to celebrate their wealth. What did that look like to them? And what we found was a very different place, very Victorian in feel, which really wasn't too surprising. But what we had to start doing, and I'll go through a lot of this quick, but again, a lot of this analyzing, really doing our research, taking photographs that we knew and pulling them out and saying, what are we seeing here? What currently exists? What doesn't exist? What do we know of this? Pulling the pieces together. And this is just examples of all of the details in the sun porch. Matching receipts with information so we can make informed decisions. And then there's also the physical analysis. Actually going into spaces, and this is stuff that you in preservation restoration is not known to you, but it's amazing if you take your time and really, really do study, and whether it's microscopic or site analysis or what have you, the receipts. That's great, but you cannot do your work unless you take it all together. You've got to really pull all the pieces together to make these decisions. And that has been our blueprint. All this pulled together, and it continues to evolve. I'll tell you, anybody who's done restoration work in particular, is that the minute you make a decision, you find a week later, you find that photograph, that receipt, and you're saying, oh shit, we just screwed up. And that was an expensive screw up, by the way, too. But these are spaces, I'm sorry, these are, again, spaces that changed very dramatically over time. This is what the space, the main hall looked like when we bought it, and again, historically, what it looked like. And as we go through this, our goal is to recreate what you're seeing here. And why? You might say, what? Because we're investing millions and millions of dollars to do this. And part of it is our philosophy. You can go to many historic house museum that has original collections. And for that reason, they do have barriers. They do have ropes. They're trying to protect that, their stewardship role. Here, we didn't have any of it, or very little of it, I should say. So we could have also gone out and just bought stuff. That looks close enough. That's of the time period. And that, for many people, might have worked, but we took a step back. We said we had the opportunity to recreate authentically what was once there. And to me, that's important. Because I don't want people going in, and this happens all the time, trying to immerse yourself in a space, and you see a chair there, and you're making the assumption. You don't have to tell them. They're going to assume that's the chair. That's the rug. Those are the colors. And you could be misleading in that if you're not being pure or forthright. And so we made the decision that we were going to take, as long as it takes, to do it as authentically as possible. And what's been exciting about this project is that we are also using it as contemporary work because we're celebrating the trades, the craftsmen, artisans of the past, while we're engaging artisans, craftspeople, tradespeople today. And as many of you know, these are, quite frankly, some of this is knowledge that is being lost. And so we have this opportunity, even in the restoration, just to not make it a static, close the doors, do restoration, open back up and say, hey, look what we did, isn't it great? To engage apprentices, to engage students, engage people, so they understand the importance of this from the past, be inspired for the future. So a lot of the work though has been going on, this is the main hall. I mean, everything from down to detail that you have these painted ceilings, and you can imagine those who especially, and I'm not knocking on universities, but you love to paint walls and paint stuff. And it's this institutional color that's everywhere. And it's easy and it's cheap, and I get it. So we had to reverse many, many years of that. This is actually our tradespeople, artisans, actually reintroducing original aluminum leaf on ceilings and reintroducing the original glazings. And I'm going to tell you that this project is a study of the power of interiors, decorations, the methodology, aesthetics. You know, those are things I don't know in your house. I suck at it. We sign something, it's cheap, you put it there, you sit down, and that's good. You know, there is a date, and you guys are much more sophisticated than I, but you probably think about what goes with what in paintings and colors, all that. And when you start doing this, you realize that one change, whether it's taking a layer of paint off, putting a glazing on a ceiling, each of those steps changes aesthetically those room spaces. The other thing you really realize is these spaces were designed to be lived in. Think about that for a fact. They were designed with intent. And what do we do at historic properties, typically? We bar people from experiencing that intent. Imagine, again, walking into a room, or not walking into a room, but being roped off and peeking in. What do you see? You see something set in time. You see it from one perspective. You're not immersed in it. You're not experiencing the whole. And again, these were floors that were, you know, just years and years of abuse and physical abuse and waxes and coatings, all coming back to its original intent. You know, everything from textiles and rugs. This is the library, which we're in the midst right now, and if you go over today, you'll be able to see the dramatic changes. Light fixtures disappeared, so we have artisans that we've had to find all along the path of these trial and error about recreating pieces that no longer exist. Because again, we're holding true to this aesthetic, authentic recreation. You know, here's another thing too, and again, I'm not going to bore you with this. Do we have any preservationists in here? A few? Okay. We also are taking this to talk about techniques and practices too. Whether best practice or not, we don't have all the answers. Nobody does. But it's about dialogue and conversation. And this gentleman you see in the photo here is somebody I met 26 years ago about. And he's from Atlanta, Georgia. And he has a company called the Rosebud Company. And his whole philosophy is passive floor refinishing. All right, so what does that mean? What does everybody do when they restore wood floors? Sand. And you go across, you will not find somebody like Michael Purser. His philosophy, and it's my philosophy, is that floors, almost more than anything, tell the story of a house or building. And the first thing we do is sand the hell out of them. Because we want fast, cheap, we want that pretty gloss look, but we're doing such a disjustice. So he's now using his process through, I forget how many square feet of flooring, and it's a passive approach with no sanding, and it preserves the beautiful marks and scratches and the history of these floors, yet you get these beautiful finished floors, and those that come over today, you'll be able to see some of that. So again, talking about new approaches as well to restoration, preservation, and sharing that. Everything from heart, I mean, think about your own house. How many details are in your house? From decorative arts and paintings and textiles, down to hardware, all these things you have to take in consideration when you're doing this kind of project. You also see the living room, which we're in the process right now today too, which was a very Victorian room, which ended up being painted over, first by Clara Ford in 1940. Beautiful Italian walnut, mahogany inlay, painted over. And then the university painted it multiple times after that. We have taken painstakingly removed all that paint to take it back to its original. And here's a nice little cut from the university institutional paint to a strip that we did a full mock-up, and you can see just the beauty of that too. Tell me, you may love on the left, but there's a different story, there's a different feel. And again, that's what we're trying to do, again, to set the stage. The dining room as well, I'm going to go through these pretty quick because I know time is a little tight. Putting on glazings on the ceiling, again, floor restoration. This room is kind of a fun one too. This is where we were having board meetings. This originally was the billiard room, really for Etzel Ford, and then when he passed away, it kind of became her study and changed dramatically. This is what it looked like originally that we're taking it back to. Done in a Chinese Chippendale style. We are recreating everything. We actually have this whole marble surround was removed. We had to match up marble, reinstall that, recreate it, to the point we're going to have a wonderful working billiard table. Now, again, you might, so what? Those are just tricks to have. My point is setting a stage to allow experiences that perhaps you can have nowhere else. We're also embracing modern technology. Somebody, I don't know if it was you, Frank, or somebody's talking about 3D printing just in a very short passing. We have great opportunity, especially with Ford Motor Company and a lot of their colleagues, to look at new technology to recreate things. It is very expensive, as you can imagine, to customize every piece of everything. So we're looking at things, one, recreating from scratch, two, purchasing things that are exact replicas of what was there. Then there's also this idea of marrying pieces, buying in maybe an antique piece that's close, and then actually customizing it and tweaking it. Then lastly is this. These thermostat covers down here on the bottom. The one on the far right is the original 1916 thermostat cover. The one in the middle is actually 3D printed that we would actually coat and plate. And the one on the far left is actually a metal cast by another company. So we're looking at 3D printing, we're looking at new technologies, because again, our goal is not to be a decorative art museum. Our goal is to create aesthetically a sense of place. All right, I'm going to have to draw up here the field room. This is a really impactful room. This is the music room. This is what it looked like when we took ownership. This is what it looked like back in the day originally. So we have spent over 1,800 man-hours removing paint in this room, plasterwork, glazing, to the point where today, light fixtures, that is the walls today, the glazing in the ceiling, and that's the room today too. So part of this is just to show you how cool it has been. But more importantly, we knew that it was important to do one room in totality from restorations and refurnishings. And so we selected the sun porch. Mainly it was the smallest. We thought it would be the cheapest. That turned out not to be the case. Also, it was physically a mess. And I'm going to bypass this because I actually have just a little quick video. This was an artist's rendition earlier on, so we can help imagining and to sell it to stakeholders as well too. But here's that's the way it looks today. But let me show you this quick video, and it is quick, with a little time lapse as well, just to show you where these rooms are going.
In the summer of 2013, the Board of Trustees of the Henry Ford Estate took ownership of the estate. The first thing that we really committed to doing at that time was addressing issues of structural failure and life safety. The first room we decided to do was the sun porch, and the leaking roofs actually made that decision for us because this was one of the rooms where we had the most damage.
A lot of historic homes have different kind of features and the finishes. This was unique in that it was actually stone, it's limestone. So we brought in a mason who we worked with in the past, very skilled, because it's a very gentle process. Similarly, this whole ceiling was falling apart. Years and years of water infiltration, plaster was falling in, caving in, lost a lot of historic integrity.
We also then had to find the artisans who could reproduce the items that were in these rooms. That included carpeting. It included finding the right textiles to go on the upholstered furniture. It included someone who could reproduce wicker furniture exactly the way it was in the early years of the 20th century, who could carve marble urns, who could do all of those details down to the Austrian shades that are on the windows.
But this is the room that they dreamt, they created, they lived in and experienced.
This is Henry Ford. This is an iconic individual. This is an iconic couple and an iconic home. And it has many lessons still to give. And people believe in that, and we greatly appreciate their support for this. But we do really encourage everyone to help us to finish the restoration that we have now begun, and the furnishing and the reimagining, so that we can get this estate back open to the public.
That's where we start asking you for money. So, because I know you guys have no money, I want to ask you. So, I'm going to conclude here and say this, is that that's all fine and good. It's actually quite exciting, the prospect of doing something for the field that's quite different. But again, it doesn't matter if the performance and what we do next becomes a typical house museum. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but because we had this really unique opportunity to be entrepreneurial with this, it would be a shame. And quite frankly, when you have the opportunity to take someone who is so iconic and known, a name, and yet this chalkboard, and if we don't hold up to our responsible and do something. So what I'm going to encourage you to do when you go over today, those that go over, is to think about when you're there, in the sense, when you're in space. What would be impactful? What would be powerful? How can a story be told? When you go there, you won't find barriers. You won't find cards. You won't find signs. You won't find really 21st century amenities or product with the idea that we want you to be taken back into space. But that in itself is not enough. So we're working on this right now. We're struggling with it at times. It is amazing, as probably here today, everybody has an opinion. Everybody has sometimes a different opinion. So I think that's always the thing, but all you can do is have those conversations, push the boundaries, and push the limits. And I will only tell you to keep your eyes on this project because I think it will be something quite important, quite special, but for the field, hopefully something that can be inspirational as well. See? I did that fast.
Time for a few questions. Mark?
Yeah.
What are some of your possibilities or ideas?
So the question was, what happened, some of the ideas about experience over there or use? You know, one of the things we've talked about is certainly when we went to Montpelier and a couple of our other colleagues looking at how they've embraced really higher, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of higher goals, higher visions, more impactful, such as democracy, leadership, Mount Vernon. You know, we look at Henry Ford as that, and we know that there's an opportunity. And so one of the things, of course, how do we embrace during the day an opportunity for the public to be engaged, but perhaps in the evenings, weekends, engage for perhaps a setting where you can have conversations about things that are meaningful not only to our society, but our local society in particular. I mean, think about Detroit. It's been going through major reimagination. Who is more connected to Detroit than Henry Ford? And here we are reimagining a state, and already we're kind of behind the eight ball by not being of service to that. And it's something I really believe as well too, is that we need to be of service. So we're looking at how we might be able to dovetail those. In addition to that, you know, we've had conversations, you know, we've been to Tenement Museum, we've been to many institutions where they've done facilitated experiences as well. What we walked away with is that we know one shoe does not fit all. We do know that people still want that guided experience, and we will be able to offer that hopefully on some basis. But I hate it. Well, not hate it, that's a little strong. I prefer to be on my own. I like to experience, I like to explore, I like to be able to engage on my own. And we know that we want to be able to offer that kind of experience too. Our big challenge though is because it's a house, because there's limitations, square footage, the way it's constructed, how do you offer a meaningful, intimate experience where it's just not people pouring through and still to be able to do something powerful? So we know that's going to be also a challenge, which I kind of like it, that it's going to be very controlled. We want to control the experience so it's meaningful. So we've talked with technology, we've talked in so many different things. I mean, we've gone to the point of holograms and I mean, everything you can imagine. And I think that's the other thing. I see my staff's like, yeah, we're not doing that. But I would say, I guess only this, nothing is not possible. Yes, please.
Do you have any plans for the other building?
The powerhouse?
Powerhouse?
Absolutely. So our goal right now is by the end of 2020 to have the powerhouse and the main house restored and furnished. By that time, we sure and heck better have what our plan is going to be for experience by then too. We also have then multiple phases after that. Ultimately, there will be a visitor center and redoing the greenhouses and other things. But the powerhouse, for those who don't know, Henry Ford was very mechanical minded and constructed a powerhouse right by the home. It was integral in the house. And it's where you find Henry Ford. And so we know this is a very special place. But imagine his laboratory, he had a private laboratory on the 4th floor. Imagine what that could be for education, for students, for imagination, to engagement. Physically and be in space, yet talk about powerful ideas Yes?
How are you coping with the accessibility?
Ironically, I just sent an email to our SHPO office yesterday about some of those issues. It's a challenge. There's no elevator in the home. We're already investigating and do feasibility studies for that. We know that's challenging and limiting. We know, the first floor of the house is accessible. The first floor of the garage and stuff is accessible. Some of the gardens are accessible. But it is something that we are taking consideration. This is also something that's interesting. I'm looking at Annie Rubel, who's our site manager. She and I also had this conversation. She's a preservationist like myself. And there's also this mix of how much do you do, and I'm a very sensitive person, and I'm going to sound like such an ass. But how much do you do the physical intent to these places that you change them aesthetically to accommodate people and safety, etc. Obviously, you got to do what you got to do, and you want it. But also, you can really change. You already heard our commitment to aesthetic, historical accuracy, and so we're walking through that as well. What does that mean? From handrails and lighting and things such as that too, where you don't take away the beauty that was originally there, originally created. So we're struggling with it right now, and there will be creative solutions.
Right, one question, and then we'll move to our discussion. Kristen.
Thank you. I share your appreciation for the aesthetics and
Yes.
the beauty of the house as it was and could be.
There's a but there.
Which is partly what that it produces for the visitor experience is a kind of lifestyles of the rich and famous moment. And words are complicated.
Yeah.
They're iconic, but they're complicated.
Very much so.
And their impact and their story has much more than a lifestyle of rich and famous. And how do you get at that? And what are the pieces? Are you interested in the anti-Semitism?
So this goes back. This kind of goes back to what Elizabeth was asking. Imagine this. One of the things we don't know about Henry Ford, he was very anti-union. Now, we today, when you hear anti-union, you're like, oh my God, how could you be? You're going to put it again. Everything is in context. He, in his own way, and it's documented, he actually was the first one with $5 workday, 8-hour workday. All these things were cutting edges, and that really, again, changed the world. So he's like, why do I need unions? I'm doing what we're supposed to be doing. All you hear is he's anti-union, and the way he went about it with some of his thugs, again, well documented. So that's a very sensitive subject matter. And I might not have said this too, that our board is comprised of the Ford family. So these are living, breathing individuals as well, which brings a whole complexity and comfortability of what you can discuss and how you discuss it, and rightfully so. And so imagine though, these are things that were occurring. All this anti-labor union discussions, the press, the media that was hitting him, he was living at Fairlane. So why not, in the library, be able to tell those stories? Imagine him sitting there having this conversation with his wife saying, because she was actually well known too, saying, you will bring in unions, and you will do this at Etzel as well. They were forcing his hands, and he was a guy, as you probably know, didn't like to be told what to do. But imagine those powerful conversations. And another one, a great story too, and many don't know, is that he ran for senator. He was encouraged by many people, as his popularity, to run for senator. He failed. He was also encouraged to run for president. Imagine this, a rich industrialist, businessman, who was so full of himself because people telling him to run for president. Just imagine what that could have been. So that's history, but contextual. Imagine having that conversation, because that occurred while they were living at Fairlane. Imagine around the dinner table, having a conversation where people sat there through whatever way, through dialogue, through technology. What does that mean? Bringing it forward. So I think all those can be discussed, and they can all be discussed there, but it really is figuring where does it make sense, and not just doing for the sake of doing it. Thank you.